So let's just get started and start the recording. And I didn't mute anybody or anything like that. But if you interrupt, just make sure that you have a question or something, because today we're going to talk about a topic that a lot of people wanna know about, which is the LP fund. And first, I think it's important to explain what exactly liquidity pools are, because that's probably the number one question I get when it comes to all this stuff. So imagine that you have, for example, two tokens, right? Or you have an LP comprised of two tokens. One is USDT or BUSD, like a stable token, and you have like $100 of that. And then you have another token making the LP, and you also have 100 units of that token. So you have 100 to 100. The price of that token in that moment is $1, because 100 tokens is equal to $100 in the LP ratio. So your token right now is worth $1. Now let's assume I buy one token with $1, right? So I put $1 in the pool and I take one token out. So now I have $101 and 99 tokens. Okay. So now my new price of that token is 101 divided by 99, which is 1 point something. So by putting $1 in and $1 out, I increase the price by about 1 point something percent, okay, of the token, because I changed that ratio. Now let's assume, for example, why is it important to have a healthy liquidity pool? So I gave you the example of 100 on one side, 100 on another side. Now imagine that you have 10,000 on each side. And again, I buy $1 of my token. So I put $1 in, so I have $10,001, and now I have 9,999 of my token. Now I didn't, because the liquidity is small or bigger than the previous option, I didn't increase the price by 1 point something percent. I increased the price by 0.01 something percent, right? So I could make a much bigger order and have a lower price impact than when the liquidity was low. And of course, the number one argument that people have is, well, but if the liquidity is high, doesn't that mean it's kind of harder for us to start pumping and everything? Yes, of course, if the liquidity is very high, you're going to need more money to kind of move the price. But it also allows you to exit with less issues. Like, for example, one of the big issues you have with pump and dump tokens is you buy $1,000 of the token, the price, triples, but then the liquidity is incredibly small, which means when you try to sell, you cause a price impact of like 30 or 40% on your position, or like 20%. So because you cause such a high price impact, you avoid selling because you don't want to lose 30% of your tokens, so you just kind of keep waiting. And then all of a sudden, someone who is thinking the same thing as you're thinking, they decide to blink first, and they sell first, and they eat the loss. And once they sell, it just starts dumping. And because the liquidity is so small, every time that anybody is dumping any sort of sizable position, it's moving the price insane amounts. So you just get this straight dump all the way to the end. And let alone if you have the devs starting to sell their wallets or anything like that, it's just like a big mess. So that's how liquidity pools work. When you buy a token, you put the amounts of token that you're buying in it. Well, in this case, it's dollars, and you're taking the same amount of tokens from the pool. Like if I'm giving, in the case of 100 to 100, I'm putting $1 in, removing one of the other tokens, because the math that the contract does is, okay, you put $1 in, that's 1% of this one token, so I'm going to give you back 1% of the other token. That's how the math is done. Now, what is liquidity pool farming, right? Or liquidity token farming? You can create liquidity tokens for anything. As long as the two contracts exist, you can do a token from BNB to BTC, like on the Binance Smart Chain, of course, or BNB to Yumi, or BNB to Ethereum on the Binance Chain. Like you can do for anything. You can also do stable coins. You can do USDT to BUSD, for example, and those are very popular with big wallets and big whales because they simply never change in price. So you can farm those, and because it's two stable coins, they never change in price, so the yields are consistent. But you can do basically of anything. Now, LP farming is when you have an operator or a website or a project that essentially pays you to stake your token. So what does that mean? Why do they do this? If I create an LP token from Cake, using the Cake contract. Let's say I create USDT to BNB, right? A very popular trading pair. The moment I create that token and I'm added to the LP pool, I'm getting trading fees from Cake for holding that LP in my wallet. And I get 0.2% divided by my participation in the pool. Like if I own 1% of the pool, I get 1% of all the fees that that pool makes. And Cake charges 0.2%, I think, at this time per transaction. So essentially, you receive that bit in your fees. Now, if you just let the LPs sit in your wallet, it will build up in value with that. Because in the example I give, when I put $1 in my LP, in the LP and I get $1 of the token back, I actually put $1 and I get back 0.0998 basically. I leave there zero point 0.2 cents, okay, which is the fee. And those zero point 0.2 cents stay on the LP, and that's how the LP builds up in value. Now, what some projects do is, okay, we want to get paid the Cake percentages from trading. So they give you an incentive for you to borrow your LPs to them so they can make the profit of the fees. And in return, they give you their native token. Like they give you a yield on the token of their project. Like in the case of Llama, for example, they start an LP of a sorts, it could be anything, and usually they pay in Llamas, meaning you give them the LP, they get the trading fees, and exchange you the Llama token, which means you become a holder, then you can decide to sell it, you can decide to stake it in other pools, and you can decide to or just hold on to it if you believe the project is going to be okay. So that's kind of the trade-off. And in the meantime, you're providing them with fees from Cake and everything for them to use to buy back their own token or whatever it is. And of course, if their pools become very popular, if people really start staking LPs a lot on their project, they're getting more and more fees from Pancake, which means they can buy more and more tokens, and so far and so forth. This is what the vast majority of the swaps do, is they use the Pancake LPs, they encourage people to lend them those LPs. In exchange, they pay them back a token. That's what LP farming is about. Now, of course, the farm that's the most popular is Pancake. It's the biggest. Projects want to be there, if nothing else, just for exposure, right? And right now on Cake, they have a wide range of farms that you can go and just pick, and you literally can essentially stake pretty much, any reliable token within the Binance chain. So that's LP farming. Now, what's regular staking? Staking is the same thing, but instead of you borrowing them a liquidity pool token, you're borrowing them an actual token like BNB, Ethereum, Bitcoin, whatever. And you put that in their own staking pools, and then they give you back their own token. In the case of Llama, is you would put, whatever like BNB on their pool, and they give you Llama back. Now, why do they do this? The same way that LP tokens can be, you can get the fees from Cake and everything. With the actual token, they can put it on Venus, they can put it on lending protocols or anything of the sort, where they get a yield from it, and in exchange, they give you back their own token. So they're just essentially putting liquidity of their own part. So essentially, and they're passing some of the risk of their own token to you, because you're now getting a yield, but it's in their own token, and then they try to convince you to hold on to it or reuse it, and that's kind of how their ecosystem can grow. So that's regular staking. It's essentially borrowing, lending your token to a project. Now, staking on its own accord in LPs has some risks. The most of it, which is if I'm lending them my tokens, then obviously it opens up the door for them to steal them from me and everything. And that's where the migrator code comes in, which is what I talked about before, also called the emergency transfer function. And what the migrator code essentially allows, it allows for the developer to transfer the tokens within a certain contract to another address at his discretion. And Cake has it in their code, but they're so big that nobody thinks that they're actually going to ever use that. But many other small contracts also still have it, but many more are deciding now to not use migrator code. Llama, for example, does not have migrator code, so the developer cannot touch your liquidity pool tokens. That's why, for example, there was an issue with the pool when they started, with the Yummy BNB pool, and they kind of had to inactivate the pool, and then they asked people to transfer, like, essentially unstake the LP and then stake it someplace else, because they couldn't do it for you. So you had to manually remove it from the pool and put it into the new one because they don't have any migrator code or emergency transfer function, which is good, which means only you can control the access to your liquidity token, and then you can go on Cake or whatever and break down the LP and you get your tokens back. So that's an important part. Now, this is LP farming and staking in general, and LP farming has some advantages because, for example, let's assume you have one LP formed with one stable token, let's say dollars, and another token which is kind of volatile, like let's say even Yumi or something, or Yummy. So your pool is 50-50, right? So let's say you have $200. So you have $100, and then you have $100 worth of Yummy in the pool. You created it today. And let's assume that Yummy would drop in price 50% by tomorrow, okay? It would just go to half. Well, if you have $200 in Yummy, obviously you now would have $100 worth of value. But because you already have $100 of one token, $100 of Yummy, you actually now only lost $50, so you have 150. So already you got some price protection there against volatility by essentially already converting half of your token to a stable token, basically. So that's already one advantage. But the other advantage is the percentage of the pool that you control. And this is where the impermanent loss comes in, which is as the price decreases, people continue to trade on the LP, right? So if you look at the LP pool in the beginning, and let's assume you owned 1% of the pool with your 100. So the pool, it was 10,000, 10,000. Okay, 10,000 of one token, 10,000 of another token. So you own 100, you own 1%, okay? As the price decreases, okay, let's say the token was 9,999, let's say it goes 9,500, 9,100, but the other token is increasing in value. So as the Yummy portion would drop, the dollar portion would rise somewhat because people are constantly trading in and out of the LP. To the point that, and this is where I advise everybody to Google impermanent loss calculator, because it tests like all those scenarios. Essentially what happens is, even as one token drops, the other one compensates somewhat for that loss in value because of the new people who are coming in the pool and adding LPs and doing trades, to the point that it shields you somewhat from the loss. So if you have a drop of, like, for example, 50% on the Yummy token, already it will only be 25% because of the protection you have, but it will be even less than that because of the interactions with people still trading the LP and joining the LP. And that's why the impermanent loss calculators are so useful, because they address that phenomena of the price difference. Now, if the LP was static, meaning nobody was trading with it, nobody was adding any more to the pool, then the loss would be that straight 25%, like whatever would be the loss of the token. But because people interact with it, and even in a lot of cases, people create a new LP token. So for example, when you created your token, it was 100 to 100 for you to have, let's say, 1%. But if the price drops quite a bit, the value of the pool drops a bit, the next guy who comes in, he's not going to spend 100 to create a token. He's going to spend like 150 or something like that. Or he's going to spend like $100 and 150 of Yummy, because Yummy now is like way cheaper. And that adds up to the pool. So all those phenomena together is what accounts for impermanent loss. And there's two advantages to it. One of it is obviously protects you from price action. So if you have a lot of volatility in one of the tokens, by having an LP, you are shielding yourself somewhat of that drop, and you're getting a yield from the token itself. So in a lot of pairs, particularly if they're very volatile, and especially if the markets are kind of downtrending, you can really shield yourself against costs, like negative costs, or against negative drops, basically. But the flip side of that is, if one of the tokens rallies like crazy and starts going up, like does a 2x, for example, you're not capturing that full 100% return. You're actually only capturing about 80%. So in the case that I have of Yummy with dollars, if Yummy doubled in price the next day, because interactions with LP, you actually only would see an 80% gain on your Yummy portion instead of 100% gain. And the more that the token will gain, the less gains you would have in total. That's what impermanent loss is. So in essence, it's a way to reduce volatility of the token pairs, assuming that one of the tokens is going to be kind of doing okay and somewhat stable. So that's why a lot of pairs are like a particular token against BNB or a particular token against USD because they tend to be a lot more stable. And so it shields you, and it's a very, very popular thing with people that already have millions of dollars because they can do LP farming of stable pairs and other things, get a 20% yield, 30% yield by essentially lending the LPs for the people to get the transaction fees, and they get like a 20% yield on like $2 million with essentially zero risk. If the farm has no migrated code, the risk is basically null. Like even if the website disappears and the contract will always exist, there's this function called that most contracts have an emergency withdrawal, where you essentially put the pool ID and your token and your address, and you essentially withdraw the LPs from the contract. So you essentially have zero risk exposure in a lot of these cases. If you just know how to do that, which there are plenty of YouTube videos to do emergency withdrawals from contracts. But that's essentially it, because the ratio of the tokens as the price changes, and people keep buying and selling the token, the ratio is always kept constant, and that's what gives the value to the token that you have. But if it's something that you want to shield yourself against, if you think the market is going to be bad, then creating an LP of a stable coin, like for example USDT, and another coin like more volatile, could be Yummy, it could be BNB, it could be other things, will shield you quite a bit against those downturns from the market. The caveat is if the market starts recovering, then you're also going to miss some of the gains. And there's excellent calculators that you can Google impermanent loss calculator, start playing around with it a little bit, and you get a pretty good idea. Now, the other thing is LP farming for refract tokens. And this is where it gets curious, right? So first off, I give a shout out to Llama Swap because they're pretty small and young, but they actually took a little bit of a risk by writing a new contract with a brand new token, that has tax and everything, and kind of seeing what happens. And I really appreciate that step. I think the collaboration is an important one, and I think it's uncharted territory, but it's a cool thing that we're involved, and I just think it's a good experience for everybody. The refract tokens have two problems, or not problems, I would say differences or challenges, which is when you create the LP, you're transacting the token, so there's a 9% tax. When you break apart the LP to get your tokens back, that's also 9% tax. So right off the bat, your Yummy portion is going to have an 18% tax on it just from you going back and forth with the LP. So if I had $500 of Yummy, $500 of BNB, right off the bat, I'm going to be losing 18% of the 500 portion, which is like what, like $90, something like that. So $90 already kind of out the door just with that. The other thing is the LP contract itself, meaning the address that has the Yummies in rewards, because the pool that they have, the Yummy BNB pool, pays in Yummies. And those Yummies are in an address, so they're getting refracts. So the Yummies in that address are building up somewhat. They're not building up fast enough to make up for the rewards that are being distributed, that people are harvesting, but they are building up somewhat. So that's one point of it. The other one is when you create an LP and you work the LP and everything, you're generating transactions which affect the charity wallet. And one of the questions I already had today is people saying, I think that the charity wallet is building up faster now than it was yesterday, but our volume on transactions is still pretty much the same, like on PoolCoin. And I said, yeah, because of the LPs. People are creating LPs, they're breaking down LPs, they're playing around. That increases the transaction volume. That increases the amount of Yummies going to the charity wallet, which then gets us closer to a charity wallet trigger, which in essence is a good thing because it just kind of generates more refracts for everybody and just kind of keeps the volume going a little bit more. So that is the second aspect of this part of the LP. And so the yields for this type of tokens need to be pretty good to justify the staking aspect. And the other advantage is, for example, the Yummy BNB liquidity is pretty high, and which is good, but it keeps getting added in. So when you have an LP pool token, every time that the charity wallet triggers and adds LP tokens to the pool, it's increasing your percentage of ownership of the pool as well, because now the pool is bigger. So that also helps with your rewards. When you break down the LP, there's now a lot more BNB and a lot more yummies in the contract than it was before the charity wallet trigger. So that's a percentage as well. How much? Not exactly sure yet because I have to do the math for that, but that's also a benefit, which could counteract some of the impermanent loss aspects. So all in all, we're kind of in uncharted territory here with the LPs with reflect tokens. And there's a lot of mechanisms here that would be at play that could make it more interesting or less interesting than other pairs. But it's certainly something that's curious to explore, and I'm happy that Llama is doing it because I'm going to be looking into my own staking and seeing what's happening and just kind of getting. But that's why I recommend to everybody that this is still very highly experimental. Don't start putting like ridiculous amounts of money in this. Definitely not one with reflect tokens. And if you want to do farming of LPs and everything, I recommend you do stable pairs in Pancake to kind of get a feel for it. The yields there are like 10% a year or 15 or something like that. Instead of going to the super volatile tokens, they pay you like 1,000% a year or something because they will have a much higher exposure to impermanent loss. So in essence, this is LP farming. Okay, you create a token which essentially does trading between two other tokens. You lend it to another project, and in exchange, the project pays you something in another token, usually their own native token. And as people transact with the LP, you are somewhat shielded from price movements, shielded downwards and also shielded upwards. And the exact amounts is what you want to have a permanent loss calculated, which there are many online, and you can start to explore that a little bit. But I recommend that as your portfolios, rise, hopefully across the board, and as you have more money put aside, that you look at farming, particular farming of stable pairs, because in essence you are providing a service to maintain the markets, and the risk is super low, like almost zero. And if there's no migrator code, it's very, very close to zero that you're going to have any loss of capital. And you cannot find any other thing anywhere, financial instrument in crypto or otherwise, that will pay you 15 to 20% a year, sometimes more, without any loss of capital, basically. And that's right now what you have in a lot of the farms. In Cake, maybe not because it's so big, but for example, even right now, if we go to a USDT farm in Cake to BUSD, you're getting an interest of 9% right now, and there's no way you have any loss of principal in that farm. If you go to other ones, like for example, ApeSwap, which is a very popular one as well, or at least recently so, and you search for a BUSD pair, right now you have a BUSD USDT pair, again, two stable coins, paying you 19% a year. ApeSwap has no migrator code. They have the emergency withdrawal, which means super low risk, basically zero, and you're getting 19% on US dollars. You will not find any other financial instrument anywhere that will pay you that. You can look, you won't find it. And if you get a little bit of risk, like BUSD with BNB, you're getting a 67, 68% yield year over year, while still have some exposure to BNB price movements, although not much, or you're shielded because again it's an LP, but you're getting 60% a year, which is phenomenal, right? And on the next Q&A, I'm going to be talking about BNB extensively, and essentially like how to make the best out of your BNB. BNB is one of my largest positions. I keep it almost exclusively all in staking for the Binance Smart Chain because the yields are incredibly good. If you go to binance.org/staking, you see the yields that are currently being paid by maintaining the Binance Smart Chain network. And it's just like overall a pretty good amount. You get about, even right now, about 15 to 20% a year on BNB yield while still maintaining 100% of BNB exposure. So if BNB rallies 100% in the next month, I will fully capture that while still making about 15 to 20% by staking that BNB. So we're going to talk about that in detail in the next Q&A. So this is what I have. This is LP farming, LP tools. And I know that seems complicated, and it is a little bit complicated. And a single talk is not going to get you to understand everything about them. But it's just to kind of get you started. This is one of the things you actually need to read a little bit more until it starts clicking in your mind. So with that said, I'm opening the floor to questions about liquidity pools and LP farming in general. So any questions? And let me see if anybody is asking to talk. Oh, there was one person here allowed to speak. Colton, go ahead, Colton.
Hey man, how's it going?
Doing good. How are you?
Not too bad. So, I was just like checking out like the Yummy coin, like the contract and like the tokenomics in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, it has the two fees set. The 3% is like the transaction fees, and then like 6% for liquidity fees. So, does this like 6% for the liquidity fees like get split up into like the half of that is the auto BNB to charity, and then the other half of it just builds liquidity pool?
No, so yeah, so 3% will go to liquidity, 3% will go to charity, and 3% will go to reflex for every token holder.
Yeah, yeah. No, I just mean
Yeah.
like in the like actual contract itself, there's only like two separate sections for fees. Like one is a 3% fee,
Yeah.
and then the other is a six. So
Oh
it's like
yeah,
the
I
six
see what you're
divided.
saying. Yeah, yeah. So you have to look at the charity wallet trigger sales when they happen. So if you look at one of the transactions when you have a charity wallet sale, we're about to have one actually in the next hour or so. You
Mhm.
notice that in that same transaction, it creates a liquidity token, an LP, and it sends it to the dead address. So if you
Okay.
look at one of the cells, and that's actually very good. You're the first person to ask that question, which means you know your stuff, which is good. Which is
Yeah,
6%.
yeah.
It's
I was
actually
just
six
wondering.
percent. Yeah, it's actually 6% that's being sent to the charity wallet. But when a charity wallet cell triggers, 3% goes to Adam, which is the owner of the charity wallet itself, like the buyback and everything,
Yeah.
because the Yomi builds up in the contract, right? And when it sells, 3% goes to Adam. The other 3% gets converted into oh, actually, 1.5% of it gets converted to Yummy, and then the remainder BNB creates an LP, and that LP is sent to the dead address all on the same transaction. So if you look at
Okay.
one of the charity wallet cells, one of the big
So
ones,
hypothetically, if
yeah,
you had wanted to like make that like I don't know split bigger, then all you would have to do is like all you're doing is essentially like changing that 6% fee to like 10, and then all of a
yes,
sudden like it's a
yeah,
larger
but
trading
we
pool.
can't, we can't do that because contract ownership is
Yeah,
announced.
yeah,
Yeah.
contracts announced, but like I'm just asking like hypothetically speaking,
Yes,
it's
hypothetically, that's what you. So one of the discussions we have, if we ever get to a point that we upgrade the contract and then migrate people to a new contract, if Yummy gets a lot bigger than all that, is the ratios of those fees and how often the charity wallet triggers. Because right now it triggers every 3 billion. We think like a smaller ratio would be better, so it's not like a spike every time it sells, and we can
mhm.
also play with those ratios. But that's only if we created a brand new contract, not with the existing one, because we can't change that.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then so like that 3% fee, that's not the 6%. Is that essentially the reflection to holders?
Yes, correct. The remaining
Okay.
3%. So the other 3% is going to holders. And if you notice and look when a big transaction happens, and if you look at the contract balance, you see that the contract actually gets 6% of the transaction, not 3. And that
Okay.
6%, eventually, when you have a charity wallet triggered, 3% of it goes to the creation of the LP. And in that same transaction, the LP is sent to the dead address, which means no ownership, right?
Okay.
So it can't be unlocked. So
Okay.
when you
Yeah.
look
I
at the
just
LP, yeah, there you go.
definitely wanted to ask because yeah, it looks like you had three, three, and three, but then I'd only seen the three and six, and I figured it had to just been like a 50 or like
No, good
yeah.
catch. Like you're actually the first person to ask that, which is awesome, man. So stick around because that was a very good question.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
thanks, man.
Yep.
I think that answers my questions.
Yep. Thank you. Any further questions? Let's see if anybody wants to speak.
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it not possible later on, so with the liquidity pool and you're putting money into it and it becomes less volatile later on, is it not possible to take money out in the future to reinvest into the actual project, reducing the liquidity pool and increasing the volatility, like just before a bear market kind of deal?
Yeah, so obviously limited options in doing such a thing, because the only way to extract liquidity from the liquidity pool is by selling yummies, basically. Like because right now there's no way to extract the tokens themselves. So if we wanted to pull BNB from the pool, for example, we have to sell yummies into it. And the only way you can get to do that will have to be through a community-driven thing where people will like donate yummies to you, and then you would sell them, and you kind of have a vote from the community as a way to build up funds. This is one of the trade-offs by having the contract ownership we announced is you can never get to a stage, which some projects do, which is, oh, we're going to have to remove liquidity because we want the BNB portion of the liquidity. So it's going to make everything way more volatile for everybody, but we get the BNB, which can help us with project development. We don't have that option because the ownership is renounced. But I don't think it's also a very healthy thing because once you remove liquidity and you make everything so much more volatile, you're making it so much harder for people to exit the project, which makes people freak out a little bit. Because if you're doing that, that means the market is already kind of fudged. It's already bad. And if you're doing something that increases your volatility when the market is bad and you make it more expensive for people to exit, I don't think that's going to end well. But we do not have that option, although if we did, yeah, it would be something that could be considered if times get like really bad, basically.
You guys have to like reset the swap and liquefy to like true or false in order to actually like if you had ownership, like that's what you have to do. Like otherwise it's kind of like locked in position, right?
Yes, for sure. I mean, there's nothing. And again, if we ever come to a point that we move to another contract, for us to get as much of that liquidity as we can, what we would have to do is say to everybody, okay, you're going to have to transfer your yummies to this address that we're going to control when you get yummy, V2 or the newer yummy into your address. And then we would use that yummy that people sent us to sell into that liquidity pool and get as much BNB as we can and use that to create the liquidity of the new contract. That's kind of how it would have to be done. It wouldn't be like ideal. It would be you lose some efficiencies. If nothing else, you lose the transfer fees. So you lose like maybe 20% of the entire thing, and you never really pull the entire liquidity from the pool just by selling the token because essentially it's an exponential relationship or decaying relationship. So you never really extract all the value. So obviously there's some issues by renouncing contract to extract liquidity that we simply can't control because again ownership renounced, but then it comes with a lot of safety features. Any further questions? Hey Colton, do you mind muting your mic because I think I'll be back on this. Yep. Any additional questions?
Hi Joe, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Just with regards to the obviously the impact of the exchanges which are upcoming in the next week or two, do you feel as if it's possibly in our interest to maybe even delay the exchange launches until the market is in a better position?
No, I understand your question, but I don't think so because at the exchange we might not have a price pump like people expect because of exchange, the market how it is. But what we are guaranteed to have is, so Bitmart is widely known for their marketing efforts. They're really good at this. I mean, they're good with the airdrops, the trading competitions, the giveaways that they do internally. They usually ask for quite a bit of your own token for it. I mean, you choose what you want to sign up for, and each one costs like $1,000 or $5,000, like in your token. But they're very, very effective at doing those competitions and giveaways and airdrops that it just dramatically increases your holder pool. I mean, if we do this kind of okay and things go a little bit semi-okay, we might increase the holder pool by like 20 or 30,000 people simply by it being on Bitmart. And the other thing that it does is it's much easier to trade on Bitmart than it is to trade your Trust Wallet and anything. So if you have someone that has Bitcoin on Bitmart, it's super easy for them to convert that Bitcoin into yummies. Like it would just literally be like 2 clicks. Instead of them having a Trust Wallet, a MetaMask, and slippage, and all that stuff, they're going to do all that for the user. So you're essentially lowering the barrier of entry so much to the point that other users, including big users on the platform, will consider investing in the token. So we feel that, yes, if this was a bull market, listing on Bitmart would already, I mean, just the announcement of it would already be like booming. We would be like going crazy. But because everybody is sitting back and see what happens, it's not ideal, but that's what we need to keep doing is we need to keep adding exchanges, features, more things, more utility, more demand for the token, that's what's going to cause us to have higher volume and higher prices. So I do think that's a very good question, but the decision that we made is totally worth to be on Bitmart simply for the exposure at this stage. Perhaps even more so. Perhaps even more so, because then we're going to be one of the few projects in there with actually some decent hype, some good branding, and yeah, I think it's worth it for sure.
Okay, cool. I was just, to be honest, I agree. I just really want to get your take on it and see if that was maybe some consideration from the team.
Yeah, and the truth is, there's no good answer at this stage in the market. Like, again, like I said many times, looking at the option volumes and everything, people are scared. The only guys who are actually buying quite a bit is big players, like people, exchanges, and those guys are positioning themselves very heavily in Bitcoin right now. But the regular retail investor is not doing anything. It's just kind of, sitting on the sidelines and see what happens. So, people looking at Bitcoin pricing and saying, "Oh, look, Bitcoin is up 4%. We're going to be okay, boys. We're recovering." Until the option and the futures market recovers with it, you're not going to have a sustained rally. That's like a guarantee. So we'll see what happens.
All right, brilliant. I agree.
Yep.
Thanks very much for your response. Just wanted to check. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. Have time for about 2 more questions, guys. So hit me.
Hey, Joe, quick question.
Yeah.
So just to recap, and then a small follow-up question. So basically, LP farming is you're more or less, to make it easy, you're protected from price action, whether it's up or down, so it's kind of insulated. And staking is you're just getting you're getting APY for the coins, and the price is whatever the price is.
And maintaining full token exposure. Yeah, and with staking, because you're only staking one token, right? You're fully exposed to the price movements of that token.
Okay, so here's my small follow-up question, because that's what I thought the case was. So on the Llama thing, and we're going to be able to stake Yummy, just Yummy by itself, or no?
No, we had a discussion of doing so, and they're open to it, to give it, but it would be like Yummy getting Yummy. I tried to convince them to be Yummy getting Llamas, because obviously, so they want us to create a pool where people stake Llamas to get Yummies, right? Because that causes demand for Llamas, and the prize comes in Yummies, which we have to give it to them, right? We want Yummies, stake Yummies, get Llama, right? Because then causes demand for Yummies, but the rewards are paid in Llamas, but then that's their problem to deal with the selling pressure, right? So that's how the balance between the two projects. So the agreement that we have is, okay, so let's do then 2 pools, one that pays in Llama, one that pays in Yummies, and also because they were being experimental about it. So I think that's why it was good. But yeah, that's exactly it. If we have a pool that you stake Yummies and you get another token, that would be ideal, because it causes demand for Yummies, but doesn't introduce selling pressure, right? Because the rewards are paid in another token.
Right.
So that would be cool. Yeah.
So there's going to be both pools once this thing is launched. So if I stake my Yummy, I'll get Llama, and if I stake my Llama, I'll get Yummy.
Yeah, we're deciding what's going to happen after this. Right now, we want to have the LP farms, but then we're deciding if we're going to do the pools or not at a later stage. Right now, we're just experimenting with the LP portion. If you go on Cake, you notice that all their pools is you stake Cake and you get something else. There's almost never a case of you stake some particular token and you get Cake back. It's always stake Cake, get something else. So it causes demand for the Cake token, right? Otherwise, they won't put it on their platform. Otherwise, they say, fuck you. Like, why would I put your token to be staked and giving you Cake? Like, it's costing us money for nothing. But projects give them the tokens for free because they get the exposure from being on PancakeSwap, right?
Okay. And then how long has the Llama token been around?
Well, only like I think a couple of months. They're still pretty young. So they started the project pretty young, and they're pretty small, but they did take a gamble in creating the contract. And the Master Shepherd, which is the main dev, which I was in contact with, he's a guy who knows his stuff, and he did the contract and everything, and we're all kind of just taking a little bit of risks to see what happens and being experimental, because I think it's important for a project to have multiple risk appetites so that people want to play around a little bit instead of just letting the token sit in the address and collecting the reflect. Some people might want to play a little bit and try to get higher yields or see what's happening. So that's kind of more the spirit of what we did here.
Okay, yeah, I need you to get on that. Whatever we get rewarded in Yummy, I need that. Like I'm trying to. I fully believe Yummy's gonna go up. I mean, we're fucking rock bottom. I mean, we can't do anything but go up. So I know we're gonna blast through all-time highs and all that type of stuff. So
Yeah,
yeah, man.
we have a lot of elements, and I think like I don't want to overpromise, but I think that next week and a half is going to be very interesting. I think there's going to be some good developments that people are going to find interesting, and then we'll see what happens from there. So,
Okay.
all right, take care. One more question, guys, and that's it. A lot of people, sorry, allowed to speak. Let's do micro or Merkle bomb or something like
Yo,
that.
what's up?
Hey,
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
up?
yeah. I was like, sorry, I just came here right now. I didn't hear the conversation. But were you guys talking about staking Yummy? Like, is
Yes,
it
we're
possible
talking
to
about the
stake them
LP
already?
farming. Well, not just Yummy itself, but there is an LP farm for Yummy and BNB on the Llama swap. If you look at the pin messages, you'll find the announcement. But there
Okay,
isn't any
thanks.
staking of Yummy itself. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
But one of the other guys I unmuted. You want to ask another question? I unmuted a couple more people.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, quick question. Is there any risk of staking or Yummy tokens on the Llama platform? Because Llama is pretty new.
Yeah, not the LPs because they don't have migrator code. Check that. And unless they have another exploit. So there is ways that Swap can exploit you if you have their native token. So like if you do the Yummy Llama LP, if they do an exploit that they just print a lot of Llama tokens or dump them or whatever, then you lose value of that LP. But if you're doing anything other than the native token with no migrator code, there's no potential of exploit. So if you do Yummy BNB, your only risk exposure is Yummy BNB price action, not the swap itself. But again, highly experimental. I reviewed the code. I'm pretty sure they don't have the migrated portion and everything. But I wouldn't also recommend for you to just go crazy on the LP farm. It's more for people to play around a little bit and get familiar. But no, they don't have any migrated code, so you're good.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right, guys. That's it. Thanks a lot.